In the final phase of the war, long before Berlin would fall and long before the last German units laid down their weapons, a quiet realization began to spread through the highest levels of the German command. It did not come as a single dramatic announcement or a sudden revelation, but as a slow and bitter understanding formed from reports, intercepted signals, and the unmistakable movement of enemy forces. German generals, many of them veterans of earlier victories and disasters alike, started to see that the Reich was no longer being defeated only on the battlefield, but through a carefully prepared plan that they had failed to stop. For years, Germany had relied on speed, surprise, and initiative. Blitzkrieg had reshaped Europe in a matter of months. Yet now those same principles were being turned against them. The enemy was preparing something immense, something methodical, something that would not rely on a single strike, but on sustained pressure from every direction. When the generals finally grasped the scale of what was coming, they also understood that the fate of the Reich was already sealed, not by one battle, but by a design that had been unfolding quietly beyond their reach. The first signs appeared in the West. German intelligence reported unusual concentrations of Allied troops in Britain. Ports were overcrowded with ships. Airfields were packed with aircraft. Factories in America were producing weapons in quantities Germany could no longer match. Yet Hitler and his inner circle remained focused on miracle weapons and defensive lines, convinced that the Atlantic Wall and secret technologies would compensate for material inferiority. Many generals, however, saw a different reality. They knew that an invasion of Western Europe was inevitable. The question was not if, but where and when. High command argued endlessly over the most likely landing point. Some insisted it would come at Pas-de-Calais, the shortest route across the Channel. Others warned that the enemy would strike where defenses were weakest. Behind closed doors, staff officers drew maps and traced possible invasion corridors, but their warnings were buried under political confidence and rigid assumptions. The German command structure had become a system where dissent was dangerous and certainty was rewarded, even when certainty was based on illusion. When the landings finally came, they did not resemble the scenario many German planners had imagined. The scale was overwhelming. Thousands of ships, endless waves of aircraft, and entire armies landing in a single operation. For German generals watching the reports arrive, it was not just a tactical shock, but a strategic one. They understood immediately that this was not a raid or a test. It was the opening move of a campaign designed to destroy Germany's ability to fight in the West. Even those who believed the beaches could be held sensed the deeper danger. Once a foothold was established, Germany would face an enemy that could replace losses endlessly, while German divisions were already stretched thin and under constant bombardment. The plan was not simply to invade, but to bleed the Reich dry through relentless pressure. As the Allies pushed inland, the true nature of the plan became clearer. This was not a race for a capital city. It was a war of attrition disguised as maneuver. German generals noticed how Allied forces avoided reckless advances. Instead, they built up supplies, secured ports, and expanded their bridgeheads slowly but steadily. Air power dominated the skies, destroying railways, bridges, and fuel depots. Every movement German units attempted was watched, tracked, and often destroyed before it could reach the front. The generals had been trained to think in terms of decisive battles, yet now they faced an enemy that fought through logistics, industry, and coordination. They began to realize that the Reich was not being defeated by bold strokes, but by a system that made resistance impossible over time. Inside Germany, the situation grew worse. The bombing campaign turned cities into ruins and factories into targets. Oil became scarce. Replacement troops arrived with little training and almost no equipment. Generals who once commanded powerful formations now struggled to assemble battalions from fragments. Reports from the Eastern Front were even more grim. The Red Army was advancing with a force that could not be stopped by exhausted German divisions. The Reich was being squeezed from both sides, and the pressure was not random. It followed a logic that German officers recognized too late. Germany was being forced to fight everywhere at once, until it had no strength left anywhere. What shocked many generals was not only the military effectiveness of this plan, but its psychological impact. The enemy did not aim merely to defeat German armies, but to break the belief that victory was possible. Each retreat, each destroyed city, Each encircled unit sent a message. There would be no reversal, no miracle counterstroke. This was a war designed to remove hope as much as territory. Officers who once believed in strategic flexibility now saw that there was nowhere left to maneuver. The Reich's borders were shrinking, its reserves disappearing, its allies collapsing. The plan that destroyed Germany was not a single operation, but a sequence of moves that left no escape. Some generals attempted to adapt. They proposed elastic defenses, controlled withdrawals, and concentration of forces in fewer sectors. Yet every proposal ran into the same obstacle: political control over military decisions. Hitler refused to allow retreats. He demanded that every position be held at all costs, even when there was no strategic value in doing so. German generals understood that this rigidity played directly into the enemy's plan. Fixed positions could be surrounded. Isolated units could be annihilated. The Reich was bleeding itself to defend symbols instead of capabilities. The discovery was painful. Germany was helping its enemies execute their strategy by refusing to change its own. By late 1944, the pattern was undeniable. The Allies advanced with overwhelming resources and careful coordination. The Soviets crushed German armies in massive offensives that Germany could not counter. The air war destroyed what remained of German industry. Supply lines collapsed. Commanders found themselves issuing orders they knew could not be fulfilled. They saw that the war had moved beyond the realm of tactical brilliance and into the realm of industrial and organizational supremacy. The plan that destroyed the Reich was based on the understanding that Germany could no longer compete in that arena. In private conversations, some generals admitted that defeat was no longer avoidable. They did not speak of losing a campaign, but of losing the war itself. The realization did not come as a sudden collapse of faith, but as a slow erosion of belief. Each new operation confirmed what they already suspected. Germany was not being outmaneuvered. It was being exhausted. The enemy did not need to gamble. It only needed to continue. When the front reached German soil, the final stage of the plan unfolded. Cities became battlefields. Civilians fled westward in endless columns. The army fought among ruins, short of ammunition and fuel. German generals could now see the full shape of what had been done to them. The Reich had been drawn into a war it could not sustain, forced to defend too much territory for too long, while its enemies built strength beyond its reach. The destruction was not sudden, it was systematic. By the time Berlin was surrounded, the generals who remained understood that the plan had worked perfectly. Germany's enemies had not relied on chance. They had relied on inevitability. They had turned time into a weapon. Each month that passed made German resistance weaker and Allied power stronger. The Reich had been destroyed not by a single invasion or a single bombing campaign, but by the cumulative effect of pressure applied without pause. When German generals finally grasped the full meaning of what had happened, it was already too late to change it. They had discovered the plan only after it had succeeded. The Reich had been defeated not only by armies, but by a strategy that recognized its limits and exploited them relentlessly. What remained was not a battlefield decision, but a historical one. The end of a state that had believed in conquest without endurance. The story of how German generals discovered the plan that destroyed the Reich is not a tale of sudden betrayal or secret weapons. It is the story of realization, of seeing too late that the war was no longer being fought on terms Germany could win. It is the story of how confidence collapsed into clarity and clarity into defeat. The Reich did not fall because it lacked soldiers or courage. It fell because it faced a system designed to outlast and overwhelm it, and because its own leadership refused to understand that the nature of war had changed. In the end, what the generals discovered was not merely an enemy plan, but the future of warfare itself. Wars would no longer be decided only by battlefield genius, but by industry, coordination, and the ability to sustain pressure over time. The Reich, built on speed and shock, had been undone by patience and scale. And when German generals finally understood this, the Reich they had served was already disappearing into ruins, not as the victim of a single blow, but as the result of a design that left no room for survival.